Thank you so much, everyone. I'm Chris Knopp. I have the great fortune of being Executive Director of Friends of the Boundary Waters Wilderness, and I'm here with my colleagues, Steve Schultz and Maggie Morin. And today we'll talk about the elections that happened just 2 days ago on Tuesday. We'll discuss both the implications at the federal and state level. We'll kind of break down the results and then look at the policy implications here. At Friends of the Boundary Waters, we are a people-based organization, and we are so grateful for all of you that support our work here. It is because of you that we're able to do it, and it's for you that we do our work. We want people to enjoy the wilderness, and we are so very grateful for your generous support here. So I will begin with a 30,000-foot overview of what happened at the federal and state level, and then I'll hand it to my colleague Steve Schultz, who will talk about things at the more granular level. So we can take down this slide now, Maggie, here, and we can talk about what happened. So at the 30,000-foot level here, at the federal level, there will be full control of Republican. We can take that slide down for right now here. We'll come back to that. We have full control of both the House and the Senate and the presidency, with Donald Trump and Republican control. That will happen in the Senate, and very well will be the House as well. So that provides for what it means for us is that there are real challenges for us to protect the boundary waters, and we'll be doing a lot of defensive work, and we'll get into that. But that is a situation. There's sort of party unity at the federal level, and so we have a number of important boundary waters champions at the federal level that we'll discuss. That'll be very important for helping us protect our million-acre wilderness with 1,200 lakes in it. And so at the state level, it's a very interesting dynamic. We will have Governor Walz will return as the governor. We'll have the Senate control is 34-33 remains in control of the Democrats. The balance of power is Ann Johnson Stewart, a Boundary Waters champion, and so we have strong support for Boundary Waters champions in the Senate. At the House, it is evenly split between the parties. And again, we're a nonpartisan organization, but it is important to understand these dynamics. And the even split between the DFL and the Republicans, 67 each in the House, presents some really interesting dynamics for power sharing that Steve will talk about in more detail. So at the federal level, again, we have unified Republican leadership that will be coming on board with President Trump being reelected. At the state level, it's mixed with power sharing in the House, but Democratic control of the Senate, and Governor Walz as the Democratic DFL governor. So, Steve, why don't you take us through the sort of elements of the work that we do, and how the four parts of our advocacy, and how we do what we do at Friends of the Boundary Waters.
Thanks, Chris. Hey, everybody. I'm Steve Schultz. I'm the Government Relations Manager with Friends of the Boundary Waters. Thank you all for turning out today to hear about the results, even though they might not be as we would have wanted to see them for protecting the boundary waters. But that's why we've got 4 different advocacy tools that we use here. We've got litigation, we work on legislation, citizen action, and political action. And we use all 4 of those tools in our toolbox to make sure that we're doing everything we can to protect our wilderness, clean water, and the boundary waters proper. So as part of our political action work, we have an affiliate, a C4 political action affiliate called Friends of the Boundary Waters Action Network. And through that work, we were involved in endorsing candidates at both the federal and the state level. Federally, we had 3 wins of the 4 endorsements that we did. We have a new Boundary Waters champion with U.S. Representative Kelly Morrison. First time I've said that. So that is great. We still have Betty McCollum, who we endorsed and as a champ and is leading the fight out there for permanent boundary waters protections. Ilhan Omar won as well. And unfortunately, we lost up in the 8th district with our endorsement of Jen Schultz against Pete Stauber. So that's just brief overview of the state of the federal level. At the state level, we endorsed 36 candidates. And of those 36 candidates, 24 won. So we had a pretty good percentage there, but we were working in some really close, tough races. So anybody who gets 100% on their endorsements probably aren't taking on those tough races, and which we did. And unfortunately, we didn't come through in all of them. We did come through in some of them though, and I'll get into more of those details later on when we're talking more about how this is all going to play out either at the state capitol or at the U.S. Capitol. And I'll turn it back to Chris.
Thank you, Steve. And so now we're going to take a deeper dive at the federal level here, and what has been done to protect the wilderness, the challenges that may come to the wilderness, and how we'll respond to those challenges. And for those of you that are viewing this, please, I see a number of folks are placing comments in the chat area. Please do that, or put questions in the Q&A, and we'll respond to those. So thank you so much. I know we've gotten some questions ahead of time already, and we'll respond to those throughout this. So at the federal level, there are a couple important things that were done, and the Biden administration did two things. And so the proposed Twin Metals mine, which is along Birch Lake and the South Coishrie River, just south of Ely there, they had some expired mineral leases that were not renewed. And so those expired mineral leases, those sort of zombie leases, as we called them, because they were dead, were not brought back to life. And so, interestingly, our conservation property that we protected along the South Coishrie River is right by there. So we have protected 360 acres of forest land with over 2 miles of shoreline along the South Coishrie River, which is right in this mining zone. So our conservation work is imperiled by this potential Twin Metals mine that the Biden administration stopped. The second part of what the Biden administration did is that they imposed administratively through a rulemaking process a 20-year moratorium on future sulfide mineral leases at the edge of the boundary waters on 225,000 acres of federal land. So these were very important steps. Again, these were on federal land. They weren't on state land or private land, but it provided really important protection for the boundary waters. And so what else is out there at the federal level? Betty McCollum, Congresswoman Betty McCollum from St. Paul, had important legislation that she introduced that would have taken that 20-year moratorium that the Biden administration did administratively and would have made it permanent. And we'll get into it in more detail. I'll tee it up for Steve, but the Pete Stauber, the congressman from the Duluth area, had legislation that would do just the opposite of that, and then more. And so that actually did pass the House last year, Pete Stauber's bill, and we'll get into that legislation in greater detail and the challenges that presents. So at what we had right now was important protection on federal land that the Biden administration advanced, and legislatively, there was nothing good that passed the U.S. Congress and something bad that passed the House, but did not pass the Senate. It was not enacted into law. So that was the status quo as of November 5th. And what I'll do right now, looking at my notes here, I'll turn this over to right now. I'll turn it over to you, Steve. Steve, why don't you talk a little bit more about the Pete Stauber legislation and the threat that imposes?
Yes, thanks, Chris. I think Maggie is going to put the actual bill language up here on the screen. So it is House Resolution 3195, ironically named the Superior National Forest Restoration Act. And really what it restores is the mining abilities on federal lands in the Superior National Forest, which includes the boundary waters. And it does three things. It removes that 20-year ban that Chris was talking about. It reinstates the leases two twin metals to be able to begin their exploration. And the third part is it would not be subject to judicial review. So, the first tool that we have in our advocacy toolbox, which is litigation, this attempts to remove that tool from our toolbox. So,
And Steve, let's
yeah.
pause on that for a bit, and everyone on the call here, we have many participants here. So this legislation would actually take the court system out of the review process. So they are, through this legislation, they're taking away one of the three branches of government. We have the executive branch, legislative branch, and judicial branch. And so the courts provide important oversight to the other two branches. And this legislation purports to take this out of judicial review. So it's a hugely, it is a huge overreach of the legislative branch to basically push out a third branch of government from this. And so just really kind of settle on how radical that is. This is radical legislation where it takes out that third branch of government. So it is HR 3195 introduced by Pete Stauber as radical legislation. So Steve, continue on that.
Yeah, definitely. The threat is real here. When this was going through the process last spring and summer, obviously we're concerned. We don't want to see anything like this going through any committees, let alone getting passed by the full House. We always had the fact that the Senate was still controlled by Democrats, who, generally speaking, are not going to do something that would reverse what the president of their party is doing. So we felt like we're on pretty solid ground. There's always different parliamentary things that Republicans could try to do, but we did have that backstop, and we also had the backstop of the president. So if something crazy would have happened, like this would have gotten through the National Defense Authorization Act, as an example, needing critical minerals for our nation's defense. If that would have gotten through, hopefully the president would have vetoed that and requested a clean bill. But now what we're seeing is at least a 52 majority for the Republicans right now in the Senate, and it could get up to 53 to 47. We still have a filibuster, though, so any type of policy would need to break that 60 vote margin to end debate on a bill, and then it could pass if they got that what's called cloture. They could pass that with just a majority vote. There are ways, though, through the Budget Reconciliation Act, though. So looking forward to January, where it looks most likely like there will be a majority for the Republicans, with Pete Stauber's party now in charge of the House, and then also in the Senate, 52 to 48, maybe 53 to 47. But the Budget Reconciliation Act allows the party in control of the Senate to pass a budget with just 50 votes. So they definitely would, I shouldn't say definitely, most likely they would have the votes to do that reconciliation. And I think it is more likely that they would put something into the National Defense Act. They would take this language from 3195 and move it over into national defense, which is a very difficult bill to fight against. It's one of the ones that is very bipartisan. Something like this could be slipped into that budget reconciliation bill and then end up passing with only 50 votes, in this case, with J.D. Vance being the tie-breaking vote in the Senate. But they do have 52. We don't know precisely if every single senator would be for something like this or against it. It would be hard for them to vote against it, though, if it were part of the National Defense Act. So like I led off, the threat is real now at the federal level. And we will definitely need to be following this a lot more, activating our supporters. The third tool in our advocacy toolkit, the citizen action. We're going to need to be getting in messages to folks all around the country. Anybody who is supportive of wilderness needs to know about this. We need to make sure that they're on our side and taking this threat seriously.
And Stephen, Maggie, if you'd please share the quote from Congressman Stauber's office yesterday. And so this was yesterday's Minnesota Star Tribune. So the Pete Stauber will be the, quote, the first thing our office did this morning was reach out to the Trump transition team to ensure that we have a clear path for critical mineral mining. And so this is something that is very real. Maggie, you can take that down. We can just have our full screens now. The threat is very, very real that's out there. I know that President-elect Trump has distanced himself from Project 2025, but that is just simply dishonest. In Project 2025 on page 523, the boundary waters is specifically targeted for the watershed is specifically targeted for being open to mining, and so this copper nickel sulfide mining. So this is something we're very much staying on top of. We're marshaling our legal and technical and policy resources to be able to respond to it. We had a question before this began. What could the Biden administration do now to advance the protection? And really, it's very, very limited. So if the Biden administration were to try to engage in an executive order to do some protection, it would be pretty, that could be undone with a similar executive order. So there's some real limits on what the Biden administration can do to do additional administrative action through a rulemaking process that was done for the 20-year moratorium that's out there. That would have to go through a notice and comment period that would take an extended period of time, and there's really not much time on that. So right now there are real limits to what the Biden administration can do to provide additional protection already, in addition to the extensive protection the Biden administration has already provided. We will get back into this sort of issue, the threat of copper nickel sulfide mining. But I also want to get into something that is also a threat to the wilderness and also a threat to the Superior National Forest that will go under the radar screen, may go under the radar screen, and it's this, and it's the hollowing out of the U.S. Forest Service. Already right now, the U.S. Forest Service and the Superior National Forest doesn't have the resources to adequately staff the team that's needed to adequately manage the forest. That's with wilderness rangers that are out there to ensure public safety, to check on permits, to ensure that people are using the leave no trace principles. Already there's a real shortage of wilderness rangers out there. And similarly, there's a shortage of other personnel to do the other important management of the Superior National Forest, whether that's prescribed burns or other policies to deal with climate change. The Superior National Forest management plan, it's a 10-year plan, but it has not been updated in 30 years. They're just starting to get into the process for updating that, and all those important issues that were not on the radar screen in 1993 that dealt with climate change and some of the environmental justice and equity issues and bringing in indigenous fire practices. All those things are not part of the forest management plan. That is going to be gutted, and there are two schools of thought within the conservative movement that'll be coming in with the Trump administration. And it's important to understand they're a little bit in tension, and combined they can be really devastating. So the J.D. Vance school of conservative thought is to actually place political people in non-political positions. And so that's where they are going to, quote unquote, take over the deep state. So in positions that are really technical in nature that deal with forest management, you will have people of political bent that don't have that depth that would be in those positions. There's a second school of thought that Vivek Ramaswamy is representative of, and that is really just, fire 50% of the federal workforce on day one. And so that would really hollow it out. And you could see, combine these two schools of thought where you would, fire half the people and then put political appointees into positions that really are not, the work of conservation and environmental protection is inherently nonpartisan, and you having that sort of partisan overlay into those positions is hugely dangerous. So, as we talk about the threat from copper nickel sulfide mining, twin metals in particular, do keep in mind that this dynamic that goes on with the hollowing out of the federal government here is hugely problematic for our protection of the boundary waters. And so that is kind of an additional underlay to this huge overstory of the threat that copper nickel sulfide mining presents here. I will, and then, we'll get back into this, but I just want to say that that citizen action part of the toolbox, you as members of Friends of the Boundary Waters are so important. You are so essential to protecting the boundary waters that we were founded in 1976 by people just like yourselves, and we may have some founders on that are on this webinar right now, and we are carrying on that tradition. And so that citizen action part, this is where your defense of the boundary waters is so important. And so, Steve, is there anything more you want to say about the federal level here?
No, I would maybe just summarize with we will need citizen action to make sure that we're at least having our voices heard out there. We do have champs in Congress, and one more again, U.S. Rep Kelly Morrison. We have Betty McCollum. We have Ilhan Omar. In the Senate, we still need Senator Smith is with us. I've met with her and her staff recently, and we'll need to make sure we keep communication open with Senator Klobuchar. She supports clean water. She supports wilderness, but we do need to make sure that our voices are being heard, and whether that mean write letters, making phone calls, sending in emails to her office, just so she knows that a big majority of Minnesotans and a big majority of folks across the country care about wilderness and clean water and special places like the boundary waters. So we'll be taking that message to them, and we'll be making sure that that we can at least in our defense of all of these important policies that we have, that we've got the citizens backing us up. We've got those voices there. It'll make our going on what Chris was talking about, if they do hollow out these agencies and they put in political appointees who don't really understand either the ecology or the law around what Congress has already said, our litigation strategy and tool is going to be very important as well when these agencies are putting out rules and different regulations that aren't in line. They obviously have a different interpretation of things like the Clean Water Act, the Clean Air Act, all of these different things. We need to make sure that we're there defending the intent of Congress, which is to keep our water clean. That is the Clean Water Act, the Wilderness Act. So we've got defense tools as well, including litigation, and we'll need you all backing us up, whether that be with time or money or showing up for a rally or making a phone call. So.
Steve, on that note, there's a question from one of our supporters who lives out of state in North Carolina, and the question is, okay, in addition to making a donation to Friends of the Boundary Waters, how can they help? By reaching out to their members of Congress. Maybe talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, definitely. I think that is one way that you can make your voice heard. Obviously we have election day, and we are involved in that. In making sure that we can, do everything that we can do to get the right people in office in the first place. But now the election's done, and we have, the people have spoken, and we need to make sure that our elected officials, whether that be in North Carolina or at the U.S. Capitol or here in Minnesota, over in St. Paul at our Capitol. So making phone calls, writing letters to the editor can be a good way to make sure that your community knows that there are still people out there who value wilderness and clean water. You already said it, donate money. We need money, whether it be for our political work or whether it be for our legislative advocacy or litigation work. So there's a lot of different ways to get involved. We have monthly webinars. where you can learn more and come up with good ideas on how to maybe engage your neighbors on this. Yeah, but it's not going to be easy. You know, I don't think we should wear rose-colored glasses right now. That the threat's real, and we've got our work cut out for us for the next 4 years, federally, and I think at the state level too.
And Steve, for the folks that are throughout the supporters that are throughout the country, we'll provide starter words. We'll provide action alert language that you can use in communicating with your elected officials, and we'll provide links to their email inboxes and things like that. So we'll provide real guidance to help you be most impactful, most efficiently in making your voice heard to your elected officials. There was another good question before we move on to the state level, Steve, that referred to some of these big investments in climate and otherwise that the Inflation Reduction Act has, and so we have a lot of these big investments that have a momentum to them, and to what extent do you foresee the Trump administration being able to stop that, or being interested in stopping that, given that the broad base of that investment in quote unquote red states as well? So your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I would think you've got what they're going to say rhetorically and what they probably think on the inside when they're getting that new bridge built. I'm sure they're these folks who maybe voted against the infrastructure bill, like Pete Stauber, are still at the ribbon cutting ceremony for the new bridge. But yeah, I think that could you repeat the question, Chris? I got it.
Sure. So like the Inflation Reduction Act and the other big federal bills, and have for like the some of the battery and solar farms and these other important investments that are out there. I mean, and to what extent can the Trump administration hold up that train?
Yeah, I think on the campaign, he talked a lot about, making sure that money doesn't get out the door. A lot of it has already gotten out the door or is committed. So it would take an act of Congress, I think, to reverse to reverse those investments. So I think the money that has already been allocated, it would be difficult to get everything through, and just by the calendar, they're not going to have a new budget passed that could do some of these clawbacks that would take this money back until I would think at least September or October of next year. And again, this money is being spent right now. President Trump has a lot of negative things to say about solar and wind power, but they're necessary right now. And solar is the cheapest form of electricity right now, especially if you include externalities. So I don't see anything. Will we have these incentives going forward in new legislation? Very, very, very doubtful. But I don't think there's going to be. I don't think they'll have as much success as President Trump talked about on the campaign trail with doing clawbacks and getting rid of this money. But I think many of us were hoping that many of these funds would be renewed going forward. So I think it is also incumbent on the states. So here in Minnesota, if we can get our plans in place through like the Public Facilities Authority, which does infrastructure investments, get that stuff pushed through and get the money spent before any clawing back could ever happen, I think would be key as well. So status right now, I think it's okay. We're not going to be getting these investments going forward without something really big happening at the federal level.
Great, and we'll transition into talking about the work we're doing at the state level, and this applies both at the federal and state level. And I'll mention the importance of having coalitions as part of our work here. And we'll talk specifically about our Prove It First coalition, which is geared towards advancing state legislation to protect clean water from sulfide mining. But this applies more broadly. And one of the important allies, in addition to sort of the broad-based environmental groups that are out there, also coordinating with Native nations in Minnesota. And so there are 11 tribal nations in Minnesota, and they are important allies in this effort. Those, as sovereign states, they have more power than we as a nonprofit have. And we've worked very closely with the Fond du Lac Band in the litigation to stop the Polymet mine that's a little further to the south from the proposed Twin Metals mine. But this is a very, very significant and important allyship, and we are working very hard to extend that allyship. The Mille Lacs Band that is dealing with the proposed Talon mine that's a little further to the west of the proposed Polymet mine that's in the Mississippi and St. Croix watersheds is an important ally to us, and so we are trying to build that as a basis for building real authentic allyship with the native nations as a way of helping us protect our clean water from sulfide mining. Additionally, as part of our coalition efforts, reaching to the faith community, there are important care of creation and other people that are socially active in the faith community that are really, really important allies to broadening our efforts. So we're not just creating a moment in time for November 5th or whatever. We're creating a movement that is broad-based and extends over time. So there was a good question that someone asked about our coordination, and it's very, very important. So I'll kind of now move to the state level. So we have a remarkable system of federalism where we have the U.S. government, the federal government, and the state government, and that interplay is hugely important. And at the state level, this is where legislation can be passed generally more quickly and can provide still robust protection of our natural resources. And so we'll get into it a little deeper, but there are 4 pieces of legislation that are out there at the state level that address various aspects of the threat from sulfide mining. Our flagship one is called Prove It First, and Prove It First which simply requires the sulfide mining companies that want to come into Minnesota, and those are Antofagasta, Glencore, Rio Tinto, that would require them to first point to one example where sulfide mining has been done safely in the United States for a period of time, 10 years, and where that mine has been closed for a period of time, 10 years, without polluting. And if that showing of proof can't be made, then we won't go forward with the projects, and that really gets at the toxic threat from sulfide mining. Our second piece of legislation is the Bad Actor Bill, and this would prevent for sulfide mining companies that have certain violations of international, federal, and state laws related to the environment, human rights, and corrupt practices, that if there are violations of those laws, then those companies cannot come into Minnesota to engage in this very toxic industry. The third piece of legislation is our taxpayer protection bill that would require these companies to put the financial, quote unquote, financial assurance for loss and environmental damage from these mines upfront in cash. And so that protects the taxpayers from this damage. There have been catastrophic losses in Brazil from various mines. One cost over $7 billion, and the other one was over $15 billion. And the financial assurances in Minnesota were only $500 million for the proposed Polymet mine. So that shows the risks that's out there. And the fourth legislation is to enshrine on state land protection of the Boundary Waters watershed to prevent sulfide mining on state land adjacent to the Boundary Waters in the Rainy River watershed. So that's the state companion to the federal legislation that Betty McCollum is advancing. So we have that. So that's the pieces of legislation that are out there. And so, Steve, maybe why don't you take it a little deeper into what we can do and what the lay of the land is now?
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Yeah, so for us to get legislation passed, we need a couple of our tools in our tool belt, and that's citizen action and political action. And we've already gone through the election, and I think we've got the lay of the land at the state capitol is challenging, I would say, still. And in our political work, We did a lot of things this election season. We were out on door knocks with our endorsed candidates who are Boundary Waters champions. We sent out emails. We had social media advertising. We had supporters doing phone calls. So we do a great like layered approach when it comes to trying to find the folks where our message of clean water and wilderness protection make the difference. And that did, we did make a difference, I think, in some of the districts. There was I don't want to, it's definitely not a red wave, but there was definitely a feeling in this election that where people, especially in rural America, folks who, maybe in the past would have been considered Democrats, like a lot of labor folks have switched over to Republican, feeling like they're not being heard or they're being left behind or whatever their reasons are. It was there. And it made it so maybe a lot of our work trying to counter that ended up with us not quite getting there. But just kind of, again, more of like the lay of the land and the landscape. The governor is going to be Tim Walz. We had thought if Harris won, he would move up to vice president, and then Peggy Flanagan, lieutenant governor, would move into that seat. But we've got the status quo at governor. In the Senate, you need 34 votes to pass anything, and our champ, Ann Johnson Stewart, out in District 45-1. So we want to give a big shout out to her. She is going to be a champ for clean water, for the Boundary Waters, and for wilderness. And she's been active in our action network throughout the year, so we know we can count on her. But it's still status quo there. It's still 34 DFLers and 33 Republicans. And then in the House, if all of the recounts go and what happened on election night remains, we'll have a tie of 67 to 67 in the House. Brad Tabke down in, the southern suburbs won by only 13 votes. And Dan Wolgamott up in St. Cloud area won by only 28 votes. And so those will have a mandatory recount. If you're within that much of a margin, the candidates don't have to pay for it or even request it. It just happens automatically. So odds are it's going to stay the same though, and it's going to be 67 to 67. So what happens in the House of Representatives when it's 67 to 67? There's only one case of this happening in the past in Minnesota, and that was after the 1978 election, which was a big election for Republicans. They won both the U.S. Senate seats, the governorship. They took the Senate, and it ended up they chiseled away at the DFL majority to get it down to 67 to 67. Basically, you need to have 68 votes to get anything done in the U.S. House, and that includes organizing the House. So if it is 67 to 67 and there's no quote unquote defectors to the other side, you can't appoint a Speaker of the House, for example. And without a Speaker of the House, you can't organize the committees. You can't organize the different divisions of the committees. In 1979, when this happened, to keep it simple, they came up with a solution, a compromise where the Republicans would be the Speaker. They would have the floor. And in that compromise, they voted in the Republican Speaker. But as part of that compromise, the Democrats got to control the three most powerful committees, including taxes, ways and means, and capital investment. And they got voting majorities on those committees. So essentially, the Democrats controlled crafting the bill in committee through that whole process. And then once it got to the floor, the Republicans controlled that time. So I feel like in it wasn't, rainbows and butterflies, but I do feel like there was more bipartisanship and less strict partisanship like we have today. So looking forward, do we think that 67 Republicans and 67 Democrats can actually get together and come up with a solution to this? I can't think of anybody who Republicans would trust on the Democratic side to be a speaker, and vice versa. I can't think of anybody on the Republican side that DFLers would trust to be the speaker. So I don't think we're going to get any defection. So there will have to be some kind of global agreement and compromise. But how long does that take to happen? And until it happens, nothing happens in the House of Representatives. We've got that's kind of just the lay of the land there. I can't predict how long that will take. It could take months. It could take all the way till the end of session when they have to pass a budget. Really, the only thing they have to do is pass a budget. All the other stuff, including our priorities at Friends of the Boundary Waters, are not necessitated by the Constitution. But the Constitution says they must pass a budget, in which case, could that happen in mid-April? Maybe it's a little sooner. Who knows how this is all going to play out? But it will be chaotic. And we hope to, if there are no House hearings, we've got plans to do a hearing on our issues, on Prove It First, Bad Actor Bill, the taxpayer protection and the permanent protection bills. And if they can't come to this compromise and actually organize the House, we will fill that vacuum with our hearing. We will fill that vacuum with our voices and our supporters. Whether or not we can raise our voices to the level that will break through all of this chaos that's up to us, and that's up to you all too as our supporters. The way we get things done is by having you backing us up, and we're here to protect the Boundary Waters, and we need you backing us up to do that. Chris, should I get into a little bit of the details on some of the races that we worked on real quick?
Well, if we do that, what did you, as an example of that, well, maybe I'll tee it up this way. There is an important suburban fringe area around the metro area in Minnesota where there's a balance of power. And this is, people are neither necessarily Republicans or Democrats, or it's an even mix of both. And so this is very much a swing area. Why don't you point to a couple of the House races that were where Boundary Waters champions were elected? Maybe pick a couple of those and talk about those districts and those candidates.
Yeah, we'll do. So we did have a really good success in the suburbs in keeping Boundary Waters champions in office. We did not have as much success with trying to get Boundary Waters champions to replace folks who do not prioritize clean water or wilderness. But let's start with the good news. The good news is up in the northern suburbs around Coon Rapids, we endorsed Carrie Rierower, who ran for Senate in 2022 and didn't win, but built a lot of good name recognition. Is from the district, a long-term resident, and decided to run for Jerry Newton's seat. Jerry Newton was a longtime champ for us. He retired, and Carrie won by, let me look at my chart here, 280 votes. So this was one of the districts where we did our full complement of political action, where we were getting our members and supporters out there to knock on doors. We made some phone calls, we did email, social media, and obviously we weren't the only ones. All of our environmental partners were there, partners that were working labor, but 280 votes. We were able to hold on to that seat for a Boundary Waters champion. And then down in the South Metro, we worked in District 48B, Lucy Ream. We endorsed her. She has been a champ for us as well. And this was a close one. I was biting my nails all night on this one, whether or not she was going to pull it out, but thankfully she did, by 418 votes. So a little bit more cushion there, as far as it wasn't as close as Carrie up in Coon Rapids. So those were two of our successes. Like I said, we had a couple of folks who we were hoping to replace folks who representatives who were not supportive of our issues. One of them was Janelle Calhoun up in Lino Lakes. We worked on Lucia Roblowski down in Afton. I came up just a little short down there. She only lost by 427 votes. So then over in the West Metro, Minnetonka Beach, Tracy Brazil, we were hoping that we could pick up this seat, being that water issues are very important out there. We were really thinking that our message of clean water and wilderness would resonate there, and it did. It was just like I said, there's a little bit more of a I wouldn't say it's a wave, but maybe a little bit of a low tide coming in with Republican votes. So it was difficult in the suburbs. just with the way that, a lot of our elections have been nationalized too, and there was not very much satisfaction with the Biden administration. And I think that did trickle its way down into the suburbs as well. There were, and then finally, Brian Cohen down in Lakeville. We put a lot of work into his race in the southern suburbs again, and he came up a little short, a few percentage points behind. There's also work that we did. So the powers, the powers is being determined by the suburbs, but it is also being determined by greater Minnesota cities. And we endorsed Mark Munger up in Hermantown, District 3B, north of Duluth, up to, includes Proctor and Two Harbors. This was a tough one, 160 votes he lost by. That he had 49.65% of the vote. And then Jeff Brand down in Mankato. He was always a supporter of our work. Pretty far away from the Boundary Waters. When I had our van down there, people were like, "What are you doing down in Mankato? Isn't the Boundary Waters up north?" But no, we did a lot of work for Jeff, and he came in just short too. He got 48% of the vote. So really, the power is being determined in the suburbs, not the inner ring suburbs. More the 20 years ago it was inner ring suburbs that were where the races were. Now it's not the exurbs, but those outer ring suburbs just south of 494, just north of 694, for example. And then we've also got the really close districts in greater Minnesota, like Mankato, Rochester, the suburbs of Duluth, if you call them suburbs, the surrounding area of Duluth, and St. Cloud. Moorhead, for example, used to be a pretty close race in 4 in the northwestern part of the state. Heather Keeler, who's a champ for us, she won fairly easily up there. I think she had a good 15 percentage point victory margin there. So that is where our work needs to focus going forward, whether that be these legislators in these close races tend to listen more to their constituents and tend to listen to their constituents that maybe they don't agree with as much, but they'll at least listen. So we need to make sure we're keeping the pressure on these Republicans who are in these districts where they had close races. And that's one way that we can keep things moving forward, and then just keeping on building our activists and our citizen action base in these areas in hopes for 2026, when everything's going to be on the ballot in the state of Minnesota. All the constitutional offices, governor, the full Senate, and the full House will be up in 2026. So
great. Thanks, Steve. And I want to pull on a couple threads that you mentioned and respond to some of the questions that were have been placed in the Q&A tab here. So some specific things that we're going to do. So we will have at the state level, we'll have a Boundary Waters Day at the Minnesota State Capitol on January 23rd. And so all of you are invited to that. And so we very much want to get that citizen action part out there. So that is coming up now. Here we go. Thank you so much, Maggie here. And so we'll have hearings on Prove It First and the other pieces of legislation at the state level. February 25th through 27th, we have blocked out for that. So maybe one of those days or all 3 of those days, that will be in St. Paul as well at the Capitol. So if we do not get a legislative hearing, we will have our own hearing at the Capitol where we'll bring in experts, witnesses that have experienced catastrophic damage from where dams have breached and caused have caused environmental damage. So we will have these hearings. So these are specific things that you can be part of. Additionally, in the wake of the threat at in Washington, D.C., we will look to schedule rallies and citizen action in Washington, D.C. As well. So those are some specific things where you can be involved. At the top there is I know we have people from all across the country on the line here, and I want to thank all of you that are supporters of us. There's Give to the Max Day, that the giving period has actually started now, and it culminates on November 21st. and we have a $175,000 match from about 3 dozen of our supporters that we're looking to match with additional gifts from new donors and other supporters. So that is another way for financially gifting the Max Day. And Maggie will drop in a link to where you can make a gift for that. But those are some specific things that are coming up as well for action. And Maggie can maybe take those down the panel down now. There were some other important questions here that I'd like to tee up for you as well. And you had mentioned this, but maybe we can this will lead into some other strategy as well. So Governor Walz has 2 more years left in his term, right, Steve? So he is likely not to run again, but there are elections in 2026, and I know it seems like there's a little bit of a hamster wheel here where there's always an election, but maybe tee up, if Governor Walz does not run, what might be out there a little bit, Steve?
Yeah, it's sometimes, especially after, we lose at the federal level. And while we didn't lose a lot here at the state, we do have an interesting situation. It's fun to maybe look forward. What can we do? What opportunities are out there? And Governor Walz hasn't said he's not going to run for a third term, but I'm just guessing that after losing for vice president, he probably won't run. But you never know. I would guess that Lieutenant Governor Peggy Flanagan would throw her hat in the ring. I think it's important to point out that the Republicans haven't won a statewide race in Minnesota in nearly 20 years now. I think 2006, when Tim Pawlenty won the governorship, was the last time Republicans have won a statewide race. And just generally speaking, again, we're nonpartisan, but we would have a maybe not a champion, but at least someone with a more receptive ear if it were a DFLer over a Republican in the governor's mansion. I already mentioned that the full Senate will be up in 2026. That hasn't happened since 2022. And the election of Ann Johnson Stewart, that was a special election. That was Kelly Morrison's seat, where she retired or resigned her seat to run for Congress, and now she's there. So that was a good transition in that area. But the Senate is not a pro BWCA majority. Even though there's a DFL majority there, it's not a BWCA majority. So we need at least 3 more seats probably to make up for some of the senators who are DFLers, but also support sulfide mining. And then in the House, we would again need to either find Republicans again, and I send out our questionnaire again just to show how we are nonpartisan. I send that questionnaire out, and I request people to request our endorsement from every single party. So if they register with the Secretary of State as a candidate, we include them in our request for endorsement. And it would be great if we could, if a Republican could get to the level where we would be comfortable endorsing them, that we could trust that they were going to support clean water and they were going to, oppose sulfide mining in the boundary waters. Maybe that day will come soon. But as it is right now, we would want to make sure that that the DFL would have a majority to be able to work our bills through the legislative process. So to get this done, we need more resources. And just to Friends of the Boundary Waters is a C3 charitable organization. Your donations are tax deductible. Friends of the Boundary Waters Action Network is a C4, which it makes it so our donations are not tax deductible, but we can work on political issues. And if we want to make a bigger impact next year and make sure that Boundary Waters champions are getting into office, and then once they're in office, listen to us, we need to step up our game too. So that's something that I'm going to be working on the next couple of years with Maggie, who leads up our Citizen Action Network, and building that base of supporters, and then getting the resources as well, so we can organize our supporters and we can organize more direct voter contact to make sure that the right folks get into office. So then we can pass Prove It First, we can pass the Bad Actor Bill, we can pass the Permanent Protection Bill and taxpayer protection. So that's kind of what I see looking forward.
To kind of emphasize a couple things that you mentioned as far as sort of the citizen action part and engaging people. A specific example of this is we have a Prove It First coalition meeting tomorrow. And so this is a monthly meeting that uses Prove It First as an organizing principle that brings in other legislative and citizen action. And so if you would like to be part of that, we will extend to the attendees here, we'll extend the invitation to them so they can be part of it. And so this is a coalition of elected officials, citizens such as yourselves, and then various organizations, faith-based organizations, other nonprofits and businesses that are concerned about the boundary waters and protection of our clean water. So that's a specific monthly Zoom meeting just like this that you can participate in. And so great. Thank you, Maggie, for dropping that in. And there was another important question that someone asked that, okay, if Pete Stauber passes some legislation that may try to open up sulfide mining in the area, our state legislation can stop sulfide mining. So our suite of bills from Prove It First to Bad Actor to taxpayer protection can stop these mines. And so that's why we're so active at the state level as well, that this is something that can have real impact and really protect the boundary water. So yes, we're involved in that. And there was another important question with respect to our work with Native nations, and to understand that, I'll just mention two quick things here, that the retained rights that Native people have, they're within the reservations, but they also extend beyond the reservations. And in Minnesota, there are two treaties of particular importance with respect to sulfide mining. There are several others, but two in particular. One is the 1854 treaty that covers the Arrowhead, and the other is the 1855 treaty that covers a lot of central Minnesota. And so within those ceded territories, the tribal nations have retained rights to hunt, fish, and gather, and that extends the zone of rights beyond the reservations. And so these include the areas where these mines are proposed. And so and then the impact on water quality standards that have been passed and are recognized by the federal government as having the effect of law. These water quality standards are in effect. So tribal nations have an incredible importance in this effort here, and it's beyond just the reservation boundaries. So it takes in and their effectiveness. They're very, very important allies. And on November 22nd, I'll be meeting with 10 of those tribal nations to talk about the effort to protect clean water from sulfide mining. So just to bring this to a conclusion here, I know there were many questions that weren't answered, and thank you, Maggie. We'll try to get back and respond to those as much as we can. As an organization, we have thousands of members, and all of you on this call, part of this webinar, are the strength of the organization. We view what we do as an extension of all of you, that we view that responsibility that we have to you as being so important. And we are prepared and ready for the challenge that's in front of us, both at the federal level and at the state level. And so we do that. We're able to do that because of you. And so that's why supporting us with Give to the Max Day, being part of our Citizen Action Network, and writing those letters to the editor, responding to those citizen action alerts, to write those letters to members of Congress or members of the Minnesota legislature, or Governor Walz. That's why you are so important, that it's that people power, that citizen action that really drives us. So thank you, Steve. Thank you, Maggie. And most of all, thank all of you that are participants on this webinar for being here. We are so grateful for you. So again, I'm Chris Knopp, the Executive Director of Friends of the Boundary Waters. Have a good afternoon, and be part of the Prove It First Coalition call tomorrow if you're able to, and stay in touch with us. We're just a phone call away. So have a great afternoon. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.